You guys know what time it is? Oh, I forgot. Um, oh, this is so embarrassing. It's like at the tip of my tongue. Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. You guys know what time it is? It's wow. I am completely blanking. You guys know what time it is? You guys sorry, I do this so often and this is honestly embarrassing for me. You guys know what time it is? It's time for time for it is time for it's like literally I'm literally like it's like right there, you know, when like something's just like right there and like you know that it's there and you guys know what time it is. It's got it. Memory. We're going to talk about memory today. Get ready. Pew 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 pew. Memory time. So there are three stages of memory. I don't know why I started talking like this is like a spoken word, like poetry slam. Three stages of memory. The first, the heart, the soul, the mind together. The second, a bird flapping in the wind, its wings, each feather telling a story. That story revolves around and becomes the sun, and not just the sun that shines light and brightness and heat and life, but the sun that is born. No, not spoken word. We're just talking about psychology. By the way, the third part, the sun is us, and we are the sun because we are life and we're the universe. Three stages of memory: encoding, storage, and retrieval. So, whenever we get information from the world, our brains take it in and they encode it, right? So that encoding process is basically the taking of information and putting it into brain code so that later it can be recalled. So encoding is just a process of taking information and input from the world and event and translating it into brain code, the neural connections that allow us to later access that memory. Then we have storage. So the information is encoded, right? And then it's stored. And then we have retrieval, which is the accessing of that memory. So if you think about writing like a document on your computer, right? The actual taking your ideas and writing it down is the encoding, or I guess typing it in would be encoding. Then you have the storage where you go, I'm going to save this as really great ideas dot docx, right? Maybe it's a Word doc. And then retrieval, later at some point you go, oh, I need to remember my really great ideas. And then you search for a document called Really Great Ideas, maybe put it on your desktop, maybe put it in a folder. And when we're dealing with memory, issues can happen at any of these three stages. So if we didn't properly encode or store something, then it's going to be impossible for us to retrieve it. Sometimes things are there and they have been stored properly, but we don't have the right retrieval cues. So if I'm trying to find my document of really great ideas and I search for really funny ideas, good stuff that I wrote, comedy ideas, smart stuff, right? If I don't have the right retrieval cues, I'm going to have an issue remembering. So we're going to talk about how memory works, and then we're going to talk about some of the issues that we can have with memory. So one thing that is very important to memory is attention. If you're not paying attention to something, you're not going to be able to encode it and store it. So if you think about a classroom, right? Sometimes you are in a classroom and maybe you're having a hard time paying attention. So you check your phone, you respond to some text messages, you doodle, and then the hour and a half of a class passes, and then you go, uh oh. right? And you don't remember anything from the class. Well, the reason why you don't remember is because you didn't pay attention. So there are three types of attention. We have visual attention, so what we see. We have our auditory attention, what we hear, and then we have our motor attention, what we're actually doing, the physicality of our body. So, depending on the type of thing that you're doing, it could be taking up any of these three types of attention. So, if you think about driving, right, there's visual, which is seeing the road ahead of you, and there is motor, which is what the coordination of your hands and feet. Part of the reason why you're not supposed to text and drive is because it takes up your visual and motor attention. You can't attend to two similar things at the same time. So if I'm texting, which requires me to look at my phone and use my hands, I'm going to have a much harder time focusing on the visual and motor aspects of driving. In the same way, if someone's talking to me and I'm reading a book or checking my text messages and responding, those are both visual and auditory forms of attention. So when we're reading, it actually takes up both our visual and our auditory because when we read, we have that little voice that's reading inside of our heads. So if that person is talking to us and we're trying to read and respond to a text, we can't process two types of auditory information at the same time. So when we're trying to figure out the key issue with attention, or with memory, we have to be aware of, well, are we paying attention in the first place, right? The whenever I'm working with students, as far as like trying to improve their grade, especially when it comes to performance on a test, there are two main issues, right? Are you familiar with the material? When you looked at a question on the test, did you go, oh, this is something that I understand and I'm familiar with, and I remember talking about this in class, right? And some people will look at a question and go, we never talked about this. I promise you, we did, right? And that's an issue of attention. If you weren't in the class, or you were in the class but you weren't present, right, you're going to miss out on that information. So sometimes the big issue for a lot of students is just being present and paying attention. Then there are other issues, but they're not relevant, so I won't bring them up. Maybe some of you want to know. The other issue is just like people who have test anxiety, right? And so if you are rushing through a question, you might not be paying attention to specific aspects of a question. If you remember when we were talking about sensation and perception, there's top-down processing where when we read, a lot of times we're making assumptions about what we are reading. We just scan through the words and we get the gist of what's happening, which means that sometimes we miss very small words like not, or which one of these is the right, or all of these are correct except, right? So those little words, if we're not paying attention, we'll miss those things. So attention is very important. And when you're looking at issues in memory, the first thing that you want to look at is, are people paying attention? So one really fun thing in attention is what's called change blindness. A lot of times we have a very hard time noticing when things have changed. And this is based off of what we personally tend to pay attention to. So these two photos, at first glance, seem like they are the exact same photo. But the more you look at it, the more you'll notice that there are very slight differences between the photos. I won't spoil it for you, but you know, give it a little look, see what you can see is different. Now, if you think about the stereotypical issues in like a heteronormative relationship, the woman in the relationship changes her hair or her makeup, and and asks her male partner, "Do you notice anything different about me?" And he goes, uh, and he's looking and he's like, I have no idea what is different. And it's so obvious that she has a little bit of smoky eye makeup, right? But he does not notice. Now, some people might take this as a sign that the guy doesn't care. But the issue isn't about care, it's about attention. Based off of how we are raised, we learn to pay attention to specific things. In the one big thing that I deal with my friends is I am an alcohol snob. So I can tell if wine has been opened recently, like that day, or a week ago. Because wine that has been opened a week ago tastes terrible to me. And I have a very specific palate, so I sound like such a jerk right now. My refined palate, but I can tell when it's old wine that's been open for a while because there's a distinct change in the taste, right? Have learned to pay attention to these things, so I'm very sensitive to them. Other people can't tell the difference. Some people can tell the difference between a very expensive 18-year-old glass of scotch and like Jack Daniels. Other people are like, ooh, they both taste exactly the same. What we learn and are trained to pay attention to is going to affect how we perceive things. So in the case of the significant other who doesn't notice something in their partner, a lot of men in society aren't raised to notice things like changes in makeup or hair. But you know, the stereotypical guy might go like, "Oh yeah, that team changed their basketball lineup. Yeah, that guy who was benched has been playing the last two games, right?" Depending on how we were raised, we're going to learn to pay attention to certain things, and we're going to remember those things, and that's going to allow us to determine whether or not something has changed. Here's another just little example of changed blindness. Same photo taken within a certain span of time. At first glance, they might seem like the exact same photo, but if you give it a little bit of time, you might notice that things are a little bit different. Did you notice that things are a little bit different? I'll give you some time. No rush. There's a moose in one photo. That's the big thing. Do you see the moose? It's right there. Look to the left a little bit of where you're looking. That's you see it now? You kind of have to squint your eyes a little bit to see. There's no moose. I gotcha. But there are differences, so hopefully you were able to catch a couple of them. So let's talk about some of the different types of memory. So the most immediate form of memory is what's called sensory memory. Every time you experience some sort of sense, right, you get a very quick experience of it, and it stays in your brain for just a little bit of time, right? Think about like when you have the camera app open on your phone and you're just like looking around, right? If you're not recording, it's not encoding into, or it's not being stored into memory, right? It's being processed, it's being encoded, but it's not being stored. Think about all the things that you see or hear during the day, right? Think of all the like smells that you've smelt in your entire life. There are certain things that you are going to eventually encode into long-term memory, but right now, as you like maybe look around whatever place you are in right now, you'll notice that there are things that you didn't notice were there because sensory memory just allows us to get the gist of what we're seeing or experiencing, but that doesn't stay around. It's just enough to have kind of a like wide angle experience of the world. And our later forms of memory allow us to do the more complex part. So sensory memory is very quick. It stays for like less than a second, but then we decide to attend to specific things, and that's how the other forms of memory work. So the next thing that we have is what's called short-term or working memory. So let's say I asked you to remember apple, tree, and kayak, right? Three words. Now, when I said those words, apple, tree, kayak, you had this sense of them. But now that you know that these are words that you need to pay attention to, you're using your short term memory. Maybe as soon as I said that, you went apple, tree, kayak, apple, tree, kayak, apple, tree, kayak, right? So that's your short term memory. That's your working memory. So if I asked you, real quick, what were the three words that I just said? Great. Perfect. You did. I'm just going to assume that you did. I'm going to assume that it was perfect, right? That's short-term memory. Now, that's great for remembering things that are happening right now, and our short-term memory allows us to have a continuous experience of the world. But then we have our long-term memory. So if in 3 years we run into each other, and I hope we do, and I go, oh, my favorite student, how are you? And then you're like, do you remember my name? I'm like, nope. But if there's one thing I do remember, and I'm sure you remember it too. What were those three words that I asked you to remember? And you say apple, tree, kayak. That's long-term memory. That's memory that's going past the immediate, right? So we have sensory memory, which is very, very brief, and it just allows us to have a continuous like scanning experience of the world, or short-term or working memory, which allows us to take information in and recall it as necessary in the present moment. And then we have our long-term memory, which allows us to take information that we have stored and then retrieve it at a later date. So I'd love you to remember these numbers for me. 8, 6, 7, 5, 3, 0, 9. I would love for you to tell me what numbers I just gave you. Okay, let's see how you did. Now, if you remember those numbers easily, it could be because you have a stellar memory, or because you remember the classic song by, I don't know, who I'm gonna Google it. 867530309 by Tommy Two Tone. 8675309 backslash Jenny. So the somebody's gonna get really angry at me and go, that's actually not a backslash, it's a forward slash. I actually do not know the difference. So if you know the song 8675309, then you're welcome for that, by the way. Then you don't actually need to remember the numbers. You just need to remember that that is the song, and those are the numbers associated with that song. So, for some of us, that might have been an easy task. For some of us, it might have been a slightly harder task. So let's just, no songs this time. I want you to remember these numbers: 17, 76, 14, 92, 21. So let's see how you did. What were what was it, 8 numbers? No, 6 numbers that I just asked you to remember? I'm assuming that you're saying them out loud right now. If you're not, then I'm pausing for really no reason, and that makes me feel very silly. I'm assuming at this point you've said all the numbers, so what was it? 17, 76, 14, 92, 2001. Is that what you said? Some of you might have noticed that instead of saying 20 and 1, I said 2001, 1776, and 1492, which were the year that the Declaration of Independence was signed, the year that Columbus, not a great person by the way, sailed the ocean blue, and the year of the terrorist attack against the World Trade Center, also known as 9/11. Now, if you tried to remember these numbers by themselves, you probably had a bit of a hard time. But if you realize that these were important dates in American and world history, then you probably had a slightly easier time remembering them because you were trying to remember specific dates and not just random numbers. I'm leading up to a point. You probably see where I'm going. Last one for you guys who just are so confident and arrogant right now, just thinking that you're the best of the best at remembering numbers. Remember these numbers: 134210601010405. You think you're so good at remembering numbers? Try to remember these numbers. They're not dates. There's no song. Maybe there is a song. Yo, girl, I got that 134210601010405. Girl. By the way, I just put that song on SoundCloud and I have 10 million listens to that song. So I'm quitting teaching to become a SoundCloud rapper. I literally just bought 2 gold chains. Call me 2 chains because I don't think that there is anybody who is being called that currently. I googled that. That is actually somebody's name. Very sorry. I'm gonna have to figure out a different rap name. So what were those numbers? Let me see if I can even remember them. I remember 134. There was a 210. Then there was a 60 and a 10, a 101 and a 405. I think those were the numbers, right? Because they're freeways. So, our memory is limited. When we're looking at our short term or working memory, we can remember 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information. So that is between 5 to 9 bits of information. Now, when it comes to working memory, right? If you look at these numbers, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 16 individual numbers. Trying to remember all of them by themselves is difficult. But if you remember that these are all freeways, then it becomes much more of a digestible task because you just have to remember 6 freeways instead of 16 numbers. So when we're trying to remember things, there are all these techniques that we can use to make the most of our memory. So we'll talk about those in a second. If you're wondering why there is a hippo here, it is because the hippo, I'm going to draw a little hair on this one, maybe a little goatee. This one gets a cool mustache. Yeah. The hippocampus is the part of the brain responsible for the encoding of new memories. So that is a very terrible pun. I'm so sorry. I'm not that sorry. So one way to remember information is to chunk it. Chunking information is when you take little bits of information and then you put them into meaningful wholes, right? So one way of chunking is by like taking the numbers that we had to remember and putting them together into numbers that are easy to remember. Another thing that people often do is by using things like anagrams. Sorry, acronyms. I always get the two confused. Acronyms are things where, so let's say I wanted to remember so we'll at some point talk about the general adaptation syndrome. So general adaptation syndrome. It's all disappearing. No, stay. The easiest way for me to remember that is just to remember gas, right? Gas is easy to remember. If I remember gas, then I can remember general adaptation syndrome. So by taking that information and then chunking it into something that's small and easy to remember, I can eventually remember something else, right? We can also play around with making things silly or memorable. So one way of remembering that the hippocampus is the place where memories are formed, right? You just remember that if you saw a hippo on campus, boy, that would be a pretty memorable experience, right? Or if you remember learning about the planets, when I learned about the planets, Pluto was a planet, and now I think it is again, or it isn't, who cares? But we learned my very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas, right? My very educated mother, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, just served us 9 pizzas. So Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, right? So there are ways of making information meaningful or interesting, and things that are interesting or meaningful to us are much easier to remember. That transitions into what's called the method of loci. Really useful for remembering a like list of things, especially if you're doing some shopping. So let's say I'm trying to remember I have to buy, let's say, some eggs, some milk, and some coffee, right? So when I know my usual route to campus, so I park in the parking lot, right? I pass by the AD building, and then I walk over that like little grass hill to get to the LB building. So as I'm walking through the parking lot, I have to step over all of these eggs. I pass by the administrative building, which is a big milk carton, and then as I'm walking over that hill, it's not grass, it's just a bunch of coffee grounds. So as I'm shopping, I just remember my normal walk to class. I park in the 80 building, and as I get out my car, I have to walk literally on eggshells. I pass by the AD building, which is a milk carton, and then I walk over that grassy hill, which is just all coffee grounds. So if I go through something that I know pretty intimately, that I can remember, and I associate something with that place, it becomes much more easy for me to remember that thing. So, especially when it comes to studying, you want to think about how to make things meaningful to you, because we learn through association, right? So if you have an auntie Susan who is always has these bizarre thoughts and responds to voices that aren't there, and sometimes has very like paranoid beliefs, then you might go, well, schizophrenia and Susan both start with S. So if I want to remember the traits for schizophrenia, then all I have to do is remember my Aunt Susan, who has very bizarre thoughts, very paranoid beliefs, and experiences active auditory hallucinations, right? It's much easier to remember something if you can associate it with something that is already there in your brain. The other things that we can do are maintenance or elaborative rehearsal. And rehearsal is essentially just repeating something over and over until it just stays in your brain. Maintenance rehearsal is the more simple version of that. So somebody gives me their phone number and I go 8675309, 8675309, 8675309, right? And that's one way of doing it. But another way of doing it would be making it meaningful, right? So sometimes when I am trying to remember, I dated somebody a long time ago. Her birthday is on May 10th. My birthday is on October 23rd. The reason why I was able to remember her birthday is because if you switch 23 and 10, you get 2, 3. So my birthday is 10/23. You switch those, it's 23, 10. 2 plus 3 is 5, 5, 10, right? I have another friend who's also born on May 10th, so I can remember both of their birthdays because their birthdays are both on 5/10, which is the opposite, quote unquote, of my birthday. By going through all that mental work, it makes it much more easy for me to remember that information. That's more elaborative rehearsal. I'm doing the work to make something new related to something that I already know. So if you're ever trying to remember something, take these techniques and see what you can do to make it either interesting or related to information that you already know, or take large chunks of information and then distill them into smaller, more easy to remember chunks. So then we have our good friend long-term memory. Now, when things are encoded into long-term memory and stored in long-term memory, usually they're there forever. Now, there are issues with this, which we'll talk about in a bit, but you should assume that long-term memory is permanent. Now, there are four types of long-term memory that fall into two main categories. We have implicit memory, which doesn't require conscious effort to recall. It's basically automatic, but it's sometimes hard to describe what's going on with them. And then we have explicit memories, which require conscious effort to recall, but are easier to verbally describe. So I'll give you some examples just to kind of show you what I mean by implicit versus explicit. You might have a fear of something, right? If you remember when we talked about classical conditioning, these fears come from associations at some point in your past. Now, you might not necessarily be able to explain why you have a fear of clowns, right? But if you see a clown, that memory of being afraid of them is automatic, right? It doesn't require conscious effort, but why specifically you're afraid of them, you might just be like, they're creepy, they're weird, right? And you might forget that scary movie that you watched when you were 5 years old. So classical conditioning is a form of implicit memory. Do you know how to ride a bike or drive a car? If you do, have you ever tried teaching somebody how to do it? For some reason, even though you know how to do it and you can do it, going through the steps of how to do it can be difficult. So let me just talk about driving a car because it's the thing that I have done. I do that. And it's super easy, right? You have your steer. Okay, so no, you have your steering wheel. The first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that it's in drive. And then in order to do that, okay, so there's an emergency brake. First of all, you want to adjust your mirrors, right? There are three of them. Well, adjust your chair first. The so if you okay, okay, so that's what I'm trying to give an example of. Like, the if I'm actually driving, I don't need to think about it, right? I sit in the driver's seat, I look up, I see that my rear view mirror needs a little bit of adjusting, I adjust it, turn over the engine, back up, do donuts in my parking lot, peel out, and then drift all the way to campus, right? uh, in order to recall it, I don't need to expend conscious effort. Driving is an effortless task for me, but trying to describe how I do it is difficult. Now, explicit memory is the opposite. Uh, in order to recall something, you need to like have that conscious effort. You need to be cued, but it's much easier to verbally describe. So if I'm talking about like an episodic memories are memories of events in your life. So if you were to say, Professor Thompson, do you remember the last time you had to record a lecture? I was like, oh yeah, the last lecture that I did was, sensation and perception. And that was super tough because my cat kept on meowing. So I had to like close my door and put my cat in the bathroom. And then my roommate, I was like, why'd you put the cat in the bathroom? I was like, because I'm trying to record and he keeps on meowing. And it was a whole argument, right? So that's easy for me to recall. But in order to recall it, I have to exert that conscious effort, but I can describe what happened. So, episodic memory is just your memory of events that have happened. Semantic memory is your memory of the meaning or purpose of things. So, right now in my hand, I have a pen that allows me to write on my computer screen. It's real great. If I look at this pen, right, first of all, I look at it and I go, it's a pen. Some of you are going, technically, it's a stylus, Professor Thompson. Shut up. Get out of here. Go bother somebody else. But fine, it's a stylus. But technically it's called a surface pen. So I'm right. I'm the best. Great. So semantic memory is either the names of things or the purpose of things, right? I can use this to write. If I have a glass, I want to get your attention. That was actually more of a. I was trying to do. Can I do this? Great. There we go. I'm at a fancy wedding and I'm trying to get the bride and groom to kiss. So semantic memory is the meaning of things, the description of things, and the purpose of things. So those are explicit memories, but these are all types of long-term memory. So sometimes we lose our memories. The most common type of memory loss, the one that you're probably more familiar with, is what's called amnesia. Now, with amnesia, there are two subdivisions. Retrograde amnesia, which is most commonly what people think about, which is that like soap opera thing where they get into a car accident and they no longer have the ability to remember their past, right? This is amnesia for episodic memory. People with retrograde amnesia, usually when you see them, still have their semantic memory. They haven't forgotten how the world works. They still probably have procedural memory, but that idea of who they are, right? That's all episodic. So retrograde amnesia is their loss of past events, facts, people, and personal information. But one thing that we should be aware of when we're talking about amnesia is that it often only affects one type of memory, sometimes two or more, but very rarely all types of memory, because memory, even though we know that it starts in the hippocampus, is distributed to various parts of the brain. Anterograde amnesia is the inability to form new memories. So if you've seen 51st Dates or the movie Memento, those characters can't create new memories. That's anterograde amnesia. So they remember everything that's happened before, they know who they are, but they lose the ability to create new memories. Now, something interesting that could happen is that while they don't have the ability to create episodic memories, they might be classically conditioned. So let's just say I got into a terrible car accident. Most of these types of amnesia that we see are caused by physical damage to the brain. So I get into a terrible car accident and I have anterograde amnesia. So the I remember who I am. I'm like, hey guys, just so you know, I'm dealing with anterograde amnesia. I'm not going to be like anything that happens from today on. I'm not going to remember. So please be kind to me and don't just do things because you know that I'm going to forget them the next day. Now, there's a marker, a dry erase marker on the board that doesn't work. The first day, I grab it, try to write with it. It's completely dry. And so I put it down and I go, ugh, I guess I'll have to grab another one. And so the next day, that marker's still there because I haven't thrown it away. What do you expect me to do? If you said reach for the marker, yes, I'll probably reach for that marker. I'll pick it up, try to draw with it, right? It's dry, I go, oh, I guess I'll have to get another one, right? Because I'm not creating new episodic memories. I don't remember the time that I grabbed it and it didn't work. Now, what will happen eventually is maybe a week or two, I go to grab that marker, and then you see me maybe hesitate as I'm reaching towards it. And then maybe I just decide not to use it. And the reason for that isn't because I remember the times that it was dry, it's that I've been classically conditioned against that marker. Something about that marker is just associated with disappointment. So my brain, even though it doesn't remember the actual times that it disappointed me, I go, this marker just doesn't feel right. So when we're looking at amnesia, we have to understand that it often only affects one type of long-term memory, which is why understanding these different types of implicit and explicit forms of long-term memory is important. So the last few things that we should talk about are the other issues in memory that could happen aside from amnesia. So one thing is forgetting. Forgetting doesn't necessarily mean that the information is gone. A lot of times, forgetting is an issue of retrieval. That's an important thing. Forgetting is an issue of retrieval. In order to remember something, you need the right retrieval queue. Think of retrieval queues as like the file name if you're looking for a document that you saved on your computer or phone. And you're like, okay, did I save it as like Psych 101, Homework Assignment 3, or did I save it as like Professor Thompson, dumb assignment, or did I just call it like blah, 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 blah? Please end the pain, right? If you have the right retrieval queue, you can access the memory. If you don't have the right retrieval queue, it's going to be a lot harder to access the memory, even if the memory is still there. So, a lot of times when we have issues in memory, it's because we don't have the right retrieval queues. Sometimes information on our brain interferes with each other. So we're also going to talk about interference. Now, if you've ever learned multiple languages, or if you happen to be bilingual, sometimes what happens is you're trying to say a word in one language, but you could only remember the word in the other language, right? And that's because your brain is trying to access the word for lo siento, ¿cómo se dice? it, um, crap. I totally forgot it. Right, it's right there. I could say it in Spanish, but like uh, it's there, right? That's a form of interference. Sometimes memories are going to interfere with one another and prevent you from accessing the memory that you actually want. Interference can be proactive. Sometimes older information is going to interfere with newer information, or it can be retroactive. Sometimes new memories interfere with older ones, right? So let's say I have a friend who uh, recently got married, and they changed their last name because they got married, and sometimes it's a thing that people do, right? So I'm trying to find their contact in my phone. Now, I almost never update my contacts, so I know that their name is still on my phone as their maiden name. Now, I can't remember, like I'm trying to look it up, and I cannot find them for the life of me because I remember their new married name, but I can't remember their maiden name, right? That would be retroactive interference because this newer memory is interfering with my ability to recall an older one. Sometimes proactive interference occurs, right? If you've ever been dating somebody and called them the wrong name, especially if it's the name of somebody who you used to date, that is proactive interference. And it sucks because they sometimes get very mad about that. And the issue isn't that you are cheating or anything like that. It's just sometimes old memories interfere with new memories. Our brain works by association. So if you're hanging out with somebody and you're having a great time and you really feel emotionally connected to them, your brain might access an older memory, and then you might go, "Hey, Chelsea," and then Jennifer will go, "Um, what?" And then you'll go, "Oh no, I'm in trouble." Just like that. That's, I think, what everybody says. "Oh no, I'm in trouble." And then you guys just have a good laugh about it. So our when we're looking at issues with memory, we could forget things because we don't have the right retrieval cues, or our memories could block another memory from coming to the front of our minds. Another issue is what is called persistence. Sometimes memories stick around that we just don't want, right? If you've ever had like an embarrassing situation happen or a traumatic situation happen and it just you keep on remembering it and you just don't want to think about it, that's an issue of persistence. Sometimes memories that we don't want stick around for way too long. There's also distortion in memories. Our memory isn't perfect. Our memory is basically us remembering things that we've remembered in the past. It's not the same as like watching a video that you recorded 2 years ago where it looks exactly the same. Our memories change over time because if you've ever like argued with someone like a friend or significant other or family member, right? That argument changes every time in your brain, right? The first time you recall the argument, they say, "Well, I disagree with you." The second time you recall the argument, it's like, "Well, what you said is kind of dumb." The third time you recall the argument, they're like, "Well, you're dumb, and I don't even like you should just die." And so, like, the memory of the experience changes over time, and they're like, "I never said that you should just die. I would never say that, right?" But your memory can change over time. And part of this is because of what are called false memories. So our memory can distort over time because of how we recall things, but also sometimes we recall things that never happened. Uh, this is because we're very suggestible. So If I insist that a specific thing happened, over time you might think that it actually happened. Eyewitness testimony is very dangerous for this reason. There's a difference between a detective asking, do you remember anything about the incident? The person that you saw, did they have any distinguishing features? Was there anything that the person happened to be holding, or anything else, no matter how little that you can remember from the incident, right? Those are relatively neutral questions. Now, how about this? Do you remember the person threatening anybody? Do you remember the person holding a weapon? Did they have any tattoos? Did they say anything to you? Did they happen to look like, did they have darker skin, right? Those, maybe not even intentionally, provide suggestions. And the more you think about that memory, the more you might go, oh yeah, that person did have a tattoo. You know what? I thought that that person looked one way, but actually, now that I think of it, they looked this other way, right? You know what? I now that I'm thinking about it, I think they might have had like I didn't see it before, but they might have had a gun in their pocket or something like that. And the more we think of something, the more our memories will be distorted, and we can create false memories. So when it comes to eyewitness testimony, you have to be careful of witness tampering. You have to be careful of people being suggested things, because if there's a lineup and all five of those people are innocent, but one of those people, quote unquote, has to be the victim, then the person will start to create memories of one of those people. Sorry, not the victim. One of those people has to be the accused criminal, right? You might start creating a scenario where that person actually did the crime. Another issue with memory is just simply misattribution, right? Sometimes we remember that one person said something when another person said something. Sometimes we remember something happening in the fifth grade when it actually happened in the seventh grade. Our memory isn't perfect. And now I'm a little bit worried because I basically taught this whole lesson from memory, and I'm hoping that I didn't say anything wrong. I mean, maybe, I don't know. Have I been holding a knife this entire time? Oh, weird. Nope, I definitely was not holding a knife. That was a false memory. I was suggested. It was because we were talking about knives and weapons, and I do not have any tattoos. Okay, great. We figured it out. False memories, blah, 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 blah. Super fun. Hope you learned something, and hope you remember these things that we talked about. Try some elaborative rehearsal.